Really appreciate your support and your input through this process. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jean Boubon. I'm your town planner, and I'm working here this evening on behalf of the Historical Commission. And with us this evening, we have Rich Volpe. He's the commission chairman. Charlie Blanchard and Barbara Search are members, and we are in need of 2 new members. So if anyone has an interest, please see the town administrator. We'd love to have you join us with the work that we do here. With us this evening, we're lucky to have Gretchen Pinillo from Public Archaeology Lab, and she is oh, you have it right up there, an architectural historian, and she's been working with us as we work through developing this plan, as is Laura Klein. She's actually the project manager for this project. So we did, why we're undertaking this plan is many of you worked on the master plan back in 2011. You'll recall that this was actually one of the goals of the plan, that we should work toward inventorying our assets and working on a community-wide historic preservation plan. So last year we were fortunate enough to receive a grant from the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and we were able to get matching funds from the Community Preservation Commission that has allowed us to retain PAL to do this work. And so we have a survey out, and many of you sitting in this room have probably taken it because you've also RSVP'd to come here this evening. And that survey will remain open for a little while longer, so if you can please get the word out. We have had a pretty good response rate, but it would be nice to see some additional responses. And with that, I think most of the slides are going to cover everything else. I think the main thing that we want you to think about as we do this process is, you know, we have a lot of historic assets in this community, and that's really what makes our community unique and gives it its character. And on the other hand, not everything is worth preserving. So hopefully this plan will help us define and decide what is important to be preserved, what do the residents of this community feel is important, and what are the things that we maybe need not focus as much energy on, and to give us a defined path forward over the next 5 to 10 years so that when people are making decisions such as the Historical Commission, whether it's a demolition delay application or something that the planning department's doing, we have a real good understanding of what are those assets we want to preserve. So thank you for being part of this process and helping us define that vision and create those goals and moving forward. And with that, I'll turn it over. Rich, did you want to say anything or just turn it over to Gretchen?
Thanks, Jean. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. A little bit of background. Laura and I both worked on the 2018 survey of Sturbridge, so we've got a good overview of some of the historical patterns of the town. So it's been nice to be able to put that to further use. So the project, as Jean mentioned, is to create a community-wide historic preservation plan. The plan is to provide a vision for the community for preservation and guidance for the town regarding actions that should be taken to support historic preservation. Historic preservation can mean a lot of things. It can be historic resources. It can be the stories and histories of the town. So the plan that we're preparing identifies properties that might be threatened by demolition through various means, opportunities for more public engagement, and suggestions for specific actions to document historic resources, considerations that should be taken when doing planning, and steps to increase public engagement and awareness. We will also be creating a framework for the implementation of these tools and others to help preserve the historic resources and landscapes in the town. These tools can include protective bylaws, implementation of local historic districts, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, becoming a certified local government, and other oversight activities. So as she mentioned, the project is funded by the Massachusetts Historical Commission's Survey and Planning Grant Program. That's a federally funded reimbursable matching 50-50 grant, so the town pays half of the cost. And then the National Park Service, as administered by MHC, pays the other half. The grant program is designed to support historic preservation planning activities throughout the Commonwealth. The 2018 plan survey that we did was also MHC funded. The matching funds for the Sturbridge project were provided by the Community Preservation Act, so your tax dollars are working on this right now. And it was done through the CPC. So what is the process that we're doing? Step one was to collect background information. As I mentioned, we did the 2018 survey, so we already had a lot of that in-house. Do historical background research, collect a public survey, and collecting input from local groups, which is the step that we're on right now. Then evaluate findings and identify historic preservation issues, and then finally prepare the recommendations and compile our final report. So step one, collect background information. So what that looks like is resources and documents that are done by other municipalities, sample historic preservation plans, statewide planning documents, and then town planning documents, like the Trail Sustainability Plan and the Town Master Plan. Then next we do historical background research. And so this includes historic maps, photographs, town histories, and then secondary reports, including MHC inventory forms. So what you can see, these are all images that we used in the 2018 survey. So there's an insurance plan of one of the Fiskdale mills, a photograph of men working in one of the Snellville mills, and then I think that's one of the Fiskdale mills in the black and white photograph. And then at the right is the cover page of one of the survey documents that we did. The next step, which is the part that we're on now, is to conduct a public survey. So as part of the process, we prepared a public survey to gauge public perceptions of preservation, their interest in historic preservation, and crowdsourcing which resources that the residents of the town think are culturally significant, threatened, or should be preserved. The survey was available in both paper form and online, and we have copies tonight if you have not done it yet. Has everybody in the room taken the survey already? Anybody who hasn't? So you can take a paper copy and drop it off at Town Hall, or there's a QR code that's posted around. You take a picture with your phone, it'll take you right to the survey, and you can do it online. Thank you to all of you who have participated so far. We really appreciate your input. It's very helpful for us to determine what everybody thinks is important. I could look at a building and go, oh, that's really significant, and you go, no, it's not. We're not worried about that building because we know something about it that I don't. So that's why these are really helpful. If you are doing a paper survey and you've not done one already, please drop it off at Town Hall by Wednesday the 23rd. If you're going to do it online, you have until Sunday the 27th. But then we need to start analyzing everything in the survey. So what you see here are some of the data that has come from the online survey. So we're using Google Forms to do the survey, and it will give us graphical representations of all of the answers. So to the left is question 9B. What makes up the town's historic character or New England feel, and what do you think of when you hear about historic preservation in Sturbridge? We can see that from the graph that resources like historic villages, publicly accessible historic buildings, historic homes, and stone walls, among other things, are all seen as contributing elements of Sturbridge's New England feel. Question 16, which gauges which resources are seen as most at risk, tells us that people in town are most concerned about losing historic landscapes, mill sites, historic homes, and indigenous cultural sites, among others. So what I thought we might do, even if you have already done the survey, I think it's useful to have a larger discourse about it. I pulled 4 questions from the survey that you can shout out answers, you can...
Oh, we need to microphone answers.
Oh, we need to microphone answers.
For people listening at home. I can pass the microphone.
Okay. So the first question is very simple, I think. What historic resources in Sturbridge are your favorite?
love the old historic homes.
Oh, you know, I like them all. I think the common, including all of this area, the historic area, including the Main Street right here, and landscapes, some of our farm scapes, especially Valley Road. In Fiskdale. But I think of them, that whole neighborhood.
Mic not working, is that
Oh, there we go.
Do you want to repeat the question?
I don't know, do we need to?
If it's important.
I got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you
I
want
apologize. Mic is on. Okay.
I think we'd have to include Old Sturbridge Village. It's within our community, and it certainly is an historic resource, and it's a beautiful place to walk around, so let's not ignore that.
saving it? Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, so next will help guide us in the plan is if there are any areas or resources that you feel are particularly threatened. This can be from development pressure from outside. It can also be what we refer to as demolition by neglect. So it's a building that is just hanging out, nobody's using it, and sort of slowly melting back into the earth. Are there any areas or resources that we should pay particular attention to make sure that we talk about what's happening that are significant?
Well, Sandy mentioned the historic landscape that we have in Sturbridge. We're very fortunate still to have them, and as she mentioned, the Dowdy Farm is one of those that is under, it was something that we really was the connecting piece of all our venues and for trails, and it's one of the most beautiful hillsides in town, and it gives you tremendous views. So, and it was a historic farm. So to me, that's one of them that is really being threatened. Along with this Oxhead Tavern, too. I heard there was a rumor that they were going to knock it down and rebuild there, and that's an old tavern that was moved to Sturbridge. It was in Brimfield. That's another old building. These buildings add such character and make us so different than anywhere else around.
I think our stone walls are, we've made some strides towards, historic roads and so forth, but we don't enforce them. It's, there's no protection, and what do you do to stop them?
I agree not only with the landscapes, but also the some of the houses in town, the historic houses in town that are privately owned, that are getting on in years, and the owners may not have all the resources available to restore them and maintain them. And it's houses like I lived for a number of years on the Common, at number 7 Charlton, and number 5, with the Chamberlain block and those houses there that require a little bit of help to keep them maintained. And if there's some way to be able to do that, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with the Chamberlain block there. And also, again, I'll go to Fiskdale and look at the Blackington building in particular and any of the other mills I worry about. And those are the buildings that I think are demolition by neglect, as well as the Oxhead Tavern.
I don't know if this is considered a resource, but we have a river that runs completely through Sturbridge from one end to the other, and it's almost unknown. I mean, a couple of bridges cross it, but to me, it's one of the most beautiful resources we have. I like to paddle a lot, and I've done the Lions Club canoe race, which traverses the Sturbridge, And except for one or two spots, you see no houses, and it's just a beautiful riverfront with trees and green borders. It's beginning to be accessed a little bit with some of the trails. A river walk, you have the trail within it, but that's, I would hate to see anything, come down and obstruct or interrupt that almost flawless flow of trees, wilderness, and unspoiled land along the riverfront.
I lived here 85 years, so I've seen a few changes. Number two question, any areas of resources that you feel particularly threatened? Yeah. From town line to town line, west to east or backwards, and north to south. Nothing in the town of Sturbridge is safe from the people coming in with great ideas, and those of us that have been a while have been through a lot of great ideas, and fortunately not all of them panned out. I'll leave it there.
Anybody else? Okay, third one. The third and fourth go a little bit together. I'm going to explain them both, and then we can split them apart. If there are any resources you think should be listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and then if there are any you think should be designated local historic districts. National Register listing is honorary only. It does not convey any restrictions unless it is in town ordinances. So some towns will say, if it is listed in the National Register, then we have purview over XYZ thing. But at the base, National Register does not do that. Local historic districts, on the other hand, do that. They're governed by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40C, and there's a lot of nuance to that says what you can and cannot control. Paint color is not a thing you can control most of the time. But that the town would have control over what happens. Some municipalities will only do actual districts and there'll be multiple buildings. Others, like Somerville outside of Boston, do individual building districts. So they can preserve a single building at a go. So are there any areas or properties you think should be listed in the National Register of Historic Places? The Town Common is already listed, the Oliver White Tavern is listed, and the Tansequiz Reservation is listed.
What was the last one?
The Tansequiz Reservation, I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly.
If you don't mind, I'd like to address an error in naming places. There is no such place in Sturbridge as the Blackington Building. There never was. There probably never will be. Proof of that, if you take the sign off the doorway in the middle of the building, you will see what it was originally called and has continued to be called by us old folks, the Otis Block, O-T-I-S. And that's in a concrete block naming the building. Mr. and Mrs. Blackington had a pharmacy there on one end, and so people just assume that must be the Blackington Building. But I don't think they ever owned it.
Yeah, so I think parts of Fiskdale, certainly both ends, certainly in the Snellville area, should be listed as a neighborhood. And the other end of Fiskdale, where the housing and the mills are, what's left of the mill housing, that those areas should be at least historic register neighborhoods. And quite frankly, I'm not sure how much support we'd get in this town for local historic districts. But those areas should certainly be National Register districts.
I have a question. If I owned an old house in town, what would be my benefit or an incentive to have it listed? Is there anything that would benefit me or help me, or other than having a title to my house?
So some of that is governed by ordinance. So there will be, and what's allowed by state law too. So I know in some places that you can apply for what is CPA here and use the funds to help maintain your property. There are other instances, like let's say your house is listed in the National Register and it sits right on Route 20. and the state's going to come in and widen it, or the Army Corps has to come in and do something. If your house is listed in the National Register and state or federal funds are being used for what we refer to as an undertaking, so it's anything road widening, new bridge, they have to take into account an effect on your building because it's listed in the National Register. So it's helpful in that way, but it is largely honorary. At the end of the day, it's my house is old and it's cool.
We could have better tours of the historic district.
For one thing, if you do have your house in a National Registry of Historic Places, for instance, or if you had a local historic district, it would be a lot easier to sell your house. I think that's one thing that's, there are people who look in Antique Homes Magazine, for instance, or other places just for old houses online. So that's one thing. But if we wanted to go down this path, I think it makes sense to tap into the idea of funding, the preservation of the homes. And I think that might do away with a lot of the opposition that Sandy's talking about. Because I hear what she's saying. People don't like the idea of their home being told what they can do and not do in their home. They do worry about things like paint, color, as you said. But the reality is it is very expensive, as I know firsthand, to fix up an old house or an old barn. It really is something that, and I would say too that for these homes, if there's a way for people to get some funding to do it, then you have a resident who, because there's blood, sweat, and tears involved a lot of times too, literal tears, you have a resident too who's going to stick and be a long-term resident of the town, which is a really nice thing. So I think it could, if we found a way to do it where we brought money into for folks, then they'd be much more willing to have, say, a local historic district set aside. And I would say do it with teeth. Why not? Don't do just the National Historic Registry.
Also, you don't have to, you can do it in degrees. It could just be the exterior. So they can do whatever they want in the interior and then or even changing or do away or something, but just keep it within a realm. So it's not that strict, but it still maintains the ambiance.
You could pay for roofing first too, because that's what kills a lot of old houses is leaks. So roofs and foundations. If you can get that fixed, the footing, then that can make a big difference.
Any specific local historic districts, or do we think we kind of covered everything together?
Also, just listening to what they were saying, Kirsty and her mother were saying, I think to making people aware of things that might be available and assisting them if their house is listed in the National Register, that people need to know that individuals can apply to have their houses listed in the National Register. And I think so outreach to people and that understanding of what's available to why it's worth their while to have it listed would be helpful.
And I would just say for the record, because we talked about the town common earlier, but I don't think anybody brought it up for this specific question, but so it's in the notes, the town common for a local historic district. And I agree with the Fiskdale district and the Otis block. I think that building with its spire and roof and all the different gables is really special.
Thank you, everyone. I've been scribbling furiously as you're saying things. So what comes next? So we've got the survey, we've got public input. The next thing that we're going to submit to the town for this report, it's a phased report, so we do part of it and submit it, do part of it and submit it. So the next things that we're going to submit are an analysis of the survey results, an overview of historic preservation and any challenges that we can see here in the town, and then an analysis of current municipal policy and management of historic resources. So town hall is a historic resource, how is it being used? That type of thing. And then the remainder of the project, the next two phases, we will prepare recommendations for the town, including those properties that should be listed in the National Register, and then a preservation action plan with steps to do and what it will look like. It's great to say you should do local historic districts, but what will that look like in practice? How do we do that? How do you get there? And so we're anticipating we'll be done by late spring, early summer, and then we'll turn it over to Jean to enact. At this point, does anybody have any other questions about the preservation plan or any of what we're working on with this? Be a little bit more open-ended questions.
Or maybe comments.
Yeah, questions, comments?
Yeah, if I could. One of the things that I think that is important is that we do have an awful lot of resources, currently. The Historic Commission, over the past several years, has done quite a bit of surveying, and a lot of the houses that we have, they've indicated whether or not they would qualify for being on the National Historic Register. And until I got on a few years ago, I hadn't really been aware of all the information that is on the website and all the data we have. So one thing we need to do is try to get that information out there to let people understand we have so many resources there. We have a lot at the library. There's a lot going on trying to preserve documents and so forth. So I think a lot of it is going to be education and letting people know what we've already accomplished.
Sorry about that.
I could maybe just add to that too. I would say within the next month and a half, we should have a story map on our website as well. So what we've done is taken the survey information that PAL and Pioneer Valley Planning Commission have done, and we're actually creating a story map so that the parcels will be highlighted, and you'll be able to click on the parcel, and it will bring up the survey data sheet and any photos or anything that went along with that to make it easier for people to understand what has been inventoried so far and to be able to gather all that information. So just wanted to put that out there as well.
That's great. And one other resource, if you want to see sort of older surveys, including what's been done in Sturbridge, is Massachusetts Historical Commission maintains what we call the MACRIS database. It's the Massachusetts Cultural Resources Inventory System. It's very long. But it's there's a MACRIS maps, and you can look it up by address. So if you're curious, if your house has been surveyed, they've been doing surveys since the late 60s, early 70s, so there's lots online. And you can find the form there also, or you can just use the database and look it up.
We could probably link that on our website as well.
Gene, once a year, they send that to me for the whole state. I mean, and it's that big
Yes.
for every town.
I've been using the survey like a lot over the past year and a half or so. I would like to see, I don't know if the Historical Commission or who's got the money for it, I would like to see a hard copy, a couple of hard copies that are available at the library. Because the old one is there, the files are there, but the only access is online, and I think there are a lot of people who would like to have the hard copy available. So I think that would be really, really helpful. And, it's probably ridiculous to do the up-to-date, but there's an old MACRIS in the library. I don't know if we want to do an up-to-date hard copy, but at least the current inventory that was done, I think should be there, because it's really very valuable, I found.
We should be able to do that. Take a little bit of time, but there's not really a reason why we can't do that. Give it to you for safekeeping.
Are there photos with the description of the homes? They're all pictures?
Yeah, I think you had a picture of one before.
Yeah, they're all.
You have one there earlier in the presentation. We'll give you an example. There's one, she can show you an example. Yeah, on the right side. That's the kind of picture you got there.
Yeah, there'll be the front page will have a photograph and a locus map, so it shows where this building is in space. Then they have a description of the building, just the exterior. When we do these surveys, we do them from the public right-of-way. We don't go in your house. We don't go on your front yard. We're just on the sidewalk. And then we'll have a historic narrative We try and get it back as far as we can. There was nothing here, and then things were built. And then, as Charlie mentioned, we will say if we think it's eligible for listing in the National Register, then that could be acted upon by the town and MHC. And there's usually additional photographs, and if we find historic photographs, we'll put those in too.
So every house that's thought to be antique is on there?
No, every house that we've surveyed.
Surveyed.
But it's not a one-to-one, every old house has a survey form. Because I think we did, or did we do what, 120, 118, something like that?
Yeah, there's over 250 all done.
When we're done. When we did the 2018 survey, I think we did
100 and
100 and something in there. And then PVPC did a similar amount. So it's a process.
They're probably on there, we can check.
Pictures are in there.
Yeah, one of the things, when you do start looking at that, as she mentioned, the surveys were done really from the street. You know, they weren't really done to talk to. When Sandy had picked out a house that was listed as being original to Streeter Road, and of course we found out that it really wasn't. It had been located on 131, and Bill Smith had moved it over there. So there are several things like that, that if you see things like that, you know, get it to the Historic Commission. We'll try to get those things corrected, because there are some things that have some errors in there. They had our house is being built in 1944, but it was actually reconstructed then from an 1880 house. So things like that they weren't able to pick up.
Are there going to be more opportunities for community engagement in the next phase and going forward?
I don't think we have another planned open forum like this. But certainly, look at, our email addresses are here. You can contact Jean and she can forward us questions if you're like, hey, I have this document, I really think you need to see it, or anything like that. Please email us with any information that you want us to have. All it can do is help make a better report and a better final product. So we're absolutely open to reach out.
Yeah, if I could add to that a little bit too. I mean,
We could have it as a meeting.
we really want this to be a working document, and the whole idea of having this plan is to be able to have some guidelines for other boards and committees to look at when things come up that might challenge certain areas. So, you know, by all means, if you have thoughts and ideas, contact Jean or any of us on the Historic Commission, and we'll get that information out there, because we do want it to be a plan that has some community input and some value because of, you know, community interest in it.
The other thing, Gretchen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this plan will also identify other priority areas for inventory.
Yes.
So, so Kirsty, to go to your comment, this plan will also identify priority areas for further survey work to be done. So I saw another hand. Thanks for coming. Our Community Preservation Committee members have another meeting, but thanks for coming.
I just wanted to say also, the two surveys that were done resulted in 20-plus buildings that were recommended from those surveys for the National Register. And the Historical Commission did have an award and plaque program for each one of those. Unfortunately, it was during the pandemic. It didn't get a lot of advertisement, but everybody that whose house was recommended from those surveys did receive a plaque and you know, a copy of the survey. This did not include buildings that were not done in those surveys. In other words, didn't include the survey from the 70s and you know, any other houses that. These were just from the surveys. That doesn't mean that if you didn't get a plaque that your house wouldn't, you know, be considered by a Mass Historical to be on the National Register.
Just a refresher for me, we're talking about, you know, old houses and survey houses. And pretty simply, what's the criteria? Is like, is it 100 years old, 150 years old? Or
It's 50 years.
50 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And There were, the last one that was done, that PAL did, was concentrated a lot on Fiskdale and a little bit, you know, of the common, doing things on the common, and a little bit of agricultural type of things. The first one that was done by the Springfield group was looking at houses that were not on the 70s group, that had been kind of passed up by that group. So having something from this exercise, preservation plan, will help a lot to give us more direction about where to go with future surveys.
And one other comment is there, I know a lot of people have the options of having a small sign on their house that says, you know, Smith House built 1801, 1850, 1912 or something, and it's completely individualized. There's no requirement. I wonder if that's something, if other communities have done that to a uniform way, to have an offer to residents to say, if your house is over 50 years old and you'd like to have the date mounted, here's our recommended signage or something. You know, very small, subtle, off to the side. 'Cause I find that fascinating to drive anywhere and see, oh, that house was built in you know, 1801 or whatever. So, just a thought.
Hold this up, this picture.
Sure.
This is history. This is Sturbridge. This is what I moved into when I was 3 years old. And we lived in a house that's over here. Had an apartment upstairs. My dad was caretaker of the fairgrounds. We saw it go from sulky horse racing to midget auto racing and race cars. This was before the war. When the Second World War started, the young fellows that could do these things joined the service. And so, and that was the end of the fairgrounds. We had just 5 of those vehicles. You could probably buy it at the church from selling it. But things changed. It was quiet in Sturbridge. I would liken it to West Brookfield. If you've been to West Brookfield, I find that, in my mind, to be one of the ideal communities left in Massachusetts. Hardwick was another that's similar. It has houses, it has people, they have public buildings, but they're quiet. But this is what was old Sturbridge before the village. I was in the class, first class of students at toured old Sturbridge Village in 1947. Things have changed. I expect change. You're at the crossroads in New England, you have to expect change. You can accept it or not accept it. I haven't quite accepted the change. Well, imagine. The first chairman of the Historic Commission when it was first formed, and I left it because I ran for the Board of Selectmen and had 5 great years there. I don't know. We've had surveys before, we've had many opinions before, and still, you never seem to be able to hold off the changes. I'm waiting now to watch Route 20. We had people that were very much against the Hobbs Brook project. They said the traffic is going to be terrible, there'll be a lot of accidents. I would like to say, and I hope I'm wrong, you ain't seen nothing yet. Those 2 great big buildings, if you go by and see how many garage doors are there, it tells me for each one of those doors there's going to be a trailer truck coming in and going out. There may not be accidents, but you're probably going to have a problem going through there. And when you get to Charlton, you meet one that's even bigger. This has changed. Again, we can accept it or not accept it. It's going to happen. If we don't do something to protect our communities, the outsiders are going to overrun it. And we'll see what we have now when the flea market comes to town. You don't want to leave your house unless you go around the way and go to the Brookfields or Worcester or whatever. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay. Thank you all. Great.
Well, I have to say, I see Bill here, and I'm surprised he hasn't said anything about cemeteries.
Yeah, you do a great job. Did a great job.
Yeah. That's another historic treasure that we have.
Yeah. But yeah, I know, yes.
Did I speak about cemeteries? I don't know. This has all been about buildings, and so I didn't know if the cemetery had a place in what you guys are doing.
No, it does.
Well, they absolutely do. Historic resources encompasses everything.
Okay.
So buildings, stone walls,
Stone walls.
All right.
churches, cemeteries,
Old burial,
the town common.
old burial ground, I know a guy. So that is something that desperately needs preservation on a micro to a macro scale. This is everything from, I gave a presentation last month to the Historical Society. It's everything from preserving the stones themselves to things like the pine trees, which, while they're pretty, they're really bad for the stones. From just being there in the shade they cast to falling over and landing on the stones, which is bad for them too. But if you want to talk in more depth, I have a lot of documentation on the old burial ground.
Okay, that would be great.
Very good. Well, thank you all.
Can we make sure you connect before you leave?
Okay, we still have some donuts, I mean, cookies.
Oh, yes, we have plenty
We're
of
all done.
goodies.
Yes. All right, I think that
We're
sort of
concluded.
covers our program for this evening. So
Thank
thank
you all
all
for
of you
coming.
for coming and your input. And there's coffee and cookies and treats.
Right?
My email address is up again, or if you can't find it, Jean can connect me with you if you have anything else you'd like to share or tell me or remind me about. Thank you all for coming.
First two charts you found.
Oh, yeah,
They came out pretty much the way you think.
Yeah, you're right.
You know, it's a shame.